course that would happen. The Kraken play their best and certainly most complete game in weeks, and that happens. That's their reward. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Kraken fall just barely in regulation to the current best team in the NHL in the Winnipeg Jets, 2-1. And we'll get to how that ends up happening, but man, was this a frustrating end to the game. It has to be especially frustrating, obviously, for the players and anybody that still thinks the Kraken have a chance to somehow get back into the playoff hunt. I mean, for the players and coaches, the organization's part in it, obviously they have to, in spite of how things look. It's their job to do everything they can to win every single game and try to get back into that playoff hunt, no matter what the odds are against them. And the way this game goes, especially with it being, like I said off the jump, their most complete game, maybe their first true 60 minutes. I mean, the second period, they could have played a little bit better here and there, but certainly the closest thing we've seen to a full 60-minute effort from the Kraken in, I mean, it might be months. I mean, really, the only other games I can think of that even might fit that description would be the win over Utah in the last homestand, the win over Boston before the Christmas break. I suppose both games against the Devils, even though they lost those, they were close games against a good team. Maybe the win over Carolina way back at the start of that road trip out to New York. But by that point, we're getting so far back, I can't even really remember the details necessarily of each of those games to say if it was a full 60 minutes or even close to it. The point is, the Kraken have not played this well throughout and consistently throughout an entire game very much at all over most of the season. So I suppose then there's kind of two ways to look at this game. Either you're on the, let's face it, at this point, even more optimistic than I try to be, the maybe even hopelessly optimistic end, where you are trying to kind of stick with the team and believe that there's still a way that if they go on a run, they can get back into this playoff hunt and maybe make the postseason, in which case, well, like I said, a game like this one, especially the way it ends, is incredibly frustrating for the Kraken to play that good of a game and still come up with absolutely nothing to show for it in the standings, where if that is going to happen, they desperately need things to start showing up in the standings. Or there's the other end of things, the, let's face it, much more realistic end, or pessimistic. They're kind of lumped into the same category at this point in time, unfortunately. But the side of things that, well, you still would like to see the Kraken play good, competitive games. You want to see the young players play well, which, once again, that Beniers line with Kakko and Schwartz, though he doesn't fit the younger category, but that line was fantastic in this game, and we'll get to some more details on that. But you got the young players playing well. The Kraken play a good, competitive, structured game the whole 60 minutes, or pretty close to it, and still managed to not come up with any points to make their eventual draft selection spot a little bit better. So on that end of things, it was kind of the ideal game. But no matter which one of those groups you see yourself more in at this point in time, I think we can all pretty much agree that this game and the way the Kraken played in this game made it a lot more entertaining and certainly a lot less frustrating to watch, maybe aside from the ending, than how the Kraken have been playing the vast majority of their games over the course of certainly the last couple of months, but maybe even the entire season. There weren't nearly as many of the giant defensive gaffes, careless turnovers, or even half-hearted skating that we've seen through parts of a lot of these games that leave you rolling your eyes and even wondering if this team cares half as much as you do at certain points, or at least certain guys on the team anyway, and definitely not through any consistent part of the game. There might have been a moment here or there, a couple of spots in the second period where they had one of those happen, but it wasn't anything that became a theme at any point in the game. And probably the part of the game where we've been seeing the most of those things happening, certainly consistently and definitely over the last few games, has been in the first period. So as we get into this game with no changes in the Kraken lineup other than Tanev out with an illness and Cartier into his spot on that fourth line on the wing, it has to be reassuring when the Kraken play in this first period, one of the best periods they've played maybe all season. Certainly, given the opponent that they're up against, it's one of the strongest periods we've seen from the Kraken in quite some time. They end up coming out of it with just a 1-0 lead, but they look like a completely different team than really what we've seen for quite a while at all. And I'm even including some of the periods where the Kraken have scored 3 or 4 goals against lesser opponents, and a lot of the times they were chasing games there to come back in a third period, and I mean, it's nice that the third period was their best one over this last stretch, but it's not great that they were constantly having to chase games to start out those third periods. They come out of the gates ready to go and really never let up throughout the entire course of these first 20 minutes. And at a more specific level, while I still think I would say that's true generally speaking of the entire team over the course of the first frame, there's certainly no group of players where it's more true than the first line, the Matty Beniers line, as they have one of the best periods for a single Kraken line of the entire season. I mean, I already said this might be one of the best periods of the Kraken as a team have played. This may very well be the best period of hockey a single line has played all season for the Kraken. They are the line that ends up scoring for the Kraken, but even outside of that goal that they get, which we will get to, every single shift for this line in this first period was a dangerous one. They got into the offensive end with the puck, I think, on every single shift that they had in the first. Maybe there was one right towards the end of it where they didn't quite make it into the offensive end with the puck. They just kind of dumped it in to go off on the change towards the end of a mostly defensively focused change. But even then, I think their first mostly defense shift came at the start of the second period, and they played pretty well in their end of the ice on top of that. But they really weren't having to do much of it over the course of the first period, because even when they did start in the Kraken end, they quickly turned it back the other way, got into the offensive end, and created some opportunities for the Kraken. Really, the only time that they didn't get into the offensive end and create sustained pressure was the time that they score. As right around the 8-minute mark of the period, they start another transition from the Kraken end of the ice down towards the Jets end, something that at this point they already had a decent amount of practice doing and had done successfully on a number of occasions just a few minutes into the game. And none are more successful than this one, as they get into the neutral zone as Jaden Schwartz with the puck up along the far boards in front of the benches. He gets just across the center ice line when he gets under the puck and just lifts a rainbow pass out to the far side and ends up landing right at the edge of the faceoff circle, kind of in the high slot, and also right in front of Kaapo Kakko as he and Beniers come in on what's kind of a broken 2-on-1. There's another guy coming in, so it's almost a 2-on-2. Either way, they treat this more like a 2-on-1. Kakko ends up getting the puck on his stick pretty cleanly after that rainbow pass from Schwartz. It's about as well placed as it could possibly be from the center ice line, hitting Kakko in stride. He gets up just a couple feet from the goal line and then throws it to the front of the net, where Matty Beniers has gotten right into the blue paint. It is in his feet a little bit, but he gets his stick right on the ice to put it on it and chip it over the shoulder and into the corner past Hellebuyck. Really no chance for Hellebuyck as long as Beniers gets a good shot off here and is able to lift it, which he's able to do both. It's going to be a goal, and sure enough, it goes right into the top of the net to give the Kraken the 1-0 lead. Schwartz and Kakko combine for the secondary and primary assist on Beniers' 9th of the season. For Kaapo Kakko, it's his 6th assist as a Kraken, his 10th point, which also now makes him a point per game in the last 9 games as a Kraken. And it puts him, and I know we already spent a little bit of time on this in the previous R&R, so not to belabor the point, but just in case you missed it, it now puts him just 4 points shy, specifically 4 assists shy, of what he did in 30 games with the Rangers, now in just 13 games with the Kraken. Also, the 6 assists with the Kraken so far equal the 6 assists that he had in 61 games with the Rangers last season. He did have 13 goals there, so a little bit more goal-focused last season for him. So I think it's safe to say he probably likes how things have gone so far here in Seattle, at least for him personally. The team record, maybe not quite as much. And then as far as Beniers is concerned, again, we already mentioned this in the previous one, but since we're here anyway, this is now 5th goal in those 13 games since Kakko joining. Give him more goals than he had in the pre-Kakko era, the 33 games that the Kraken played before that trade. And then, of course, there's also Jaden Schwartz, not to be forgotten on this play, as honestly his pass might have been the nicest part of all of it, but he's been fantastic for the Kraken all season long, really regardless of what line he's been on. Anyway, getting back to the game, the rest of the first period is pretty back and forth, a fairly entertaining, fast-paced, evenly played first period, at least when the Beniers line wasn't on the ice. It's really that line that tilts this period in the Kraken favor overall, I'd say. I don't think there's too much arguing that. And as we get into the second period, this is the frame that, if you wanted to make an argument the Kraken didn't quite play a full 60, it would be bits and pieces of this second period that I think you would use to make that argument. The first power play that the Jets get is one that they really never should have had. It is the one they end up scoring on. It doesn't take them very long. I think just 21, 22 seconds for the best power play in the NHL to end up finding the back of the net. Just some very quick back and forth across the face of all the Kraken players' puck movement. Eventually it's a shot on net that Decord does make the save on, but the rebound goes out to the far side where it just happens to hit Scheifele right on the tape, and he puts it back on net a little bit faster than Decord can get across. it finds the back of it to give the Jets the power play goal on a power play that, again, they really never should have had in the first place. They end up getting it as Alexiak gets called for interference, cross-check. I can't remember exactly what the penalty was. Either way, it was a terrible call, as Alexiak basically gets penalized here just for having a Jets player fall to the ice in front of him. Not untouched, but certainly without any help from Alexiak that he falls, and just happens to be on the rush, so they call Alexiak for whatever they make up on the spot. And yeah, there's the argument that the Kraken power play that they got early on in the first that they really didn't do much with also was not a particularly great call, so maybe this is a makeup call, which, I mean, there's still the argument that two wrongs don't make a right, and more bad officiating doesn't make up for the bad officiating you did earlier, but that's NHL officiating, baby, I guess. I don't know. It's a stupid way to do things, but it's the way things often get done. This horrible makeup call for a not-so-great call earlier also isn't particularly even because, as we know, the Kraken power play is not fantastic, and the Jets power play is the best in the NHL, and they show why as they tie the game here, still relatively early on in the second. Okay, actually it was a little bit towards the middle of the period, but either way, the Jets tie the game on this first power play, and then not long after, get a second power play, this time for a legitimate penalty. It's a high-sticking call of Mitchell Stevens. He heads to the box. This time the Kraken are able to kill it off, and then the rest of the second period is kind of more of what we saw in the first, but without as much of the interjection from the Beniers line of constantly getting the offensive end and creating pressure. They did, earlier on in the period before the two Jets power plays, have a chance to put the Kraken up 2-0 with a 2-on-1 chance for Kakko and Beniers. Again, a bit of a broken one. A second Jets player is kind of able to get into the play. This time, Beniers doesn't really have the pass across to Kakko, so he winds up to take the shot, but by the time he fires it off, it's, I think, Nikolai Ehlers that's able to slide in front of him and just get enough of it with his shin to have it go above the net and out, so Hellebuyck doesn't even have to make the save there, but another pretty high danger chance there that line is able to create. And then as we get into the third period with the game still tied at 1, honestly, it's kind of just more of the same, but maybe a little bit more well played and structured defensively from both teams. The Jets not giving the Kraken quite as much on the rush as the Kraken have been able to get throughout really both of the first two periods, and then the Kraken doing a pretty good job of keeping things mostly to the outside and their end of the ice when the Jets were able to get into the Kraken end, and not doing as much of giving the Jets pockets of empty space closer to the net here and there. That they've done a pretty good job of keeping things to the outside in the first, but in the second it had gotten a little bit more spotty. There's one or two shifts here and there where they gave the Jets some much better looks than you would like to see on a consistent basis. Fortunately, unlike games in recent past, the Kraken really weren't doing it super consistently. It was just kind of one or two here and there over the course of the second. In the first and certainly here in the third, they'd pretty much cleaned that up, and the Jets weren't getting much of anything dangerous, so we kind of just coast through this third period without really it ever feeling like this game wasn't headed to overtime. And this game felt even more destined for overtime than ever, and these are two teams that went to overtime in their only other meeting of the season way back towards the beginning when the Jets were still undefeated and trying to set a record for longest undefeated streak to start a season. The Kraken were one of the few teams that really gave them a challenge there early on, and it felt like we were headed right back there. Then, with 30 seconds left, Adam Larsson has the puck behind the Kraken net, so yeah, what dangerous could possibly come out of this as he throws it up into the glass to try and rim it out, and I mean, heck, even if it gets down for an icing, at that point you've got a face-off in the Kraken end with probably like 15 seconds left. It's not a super high chance of the Jets scoring there, but the puck, because that's just how the Kraken season is going to go, that if they're not going to shoot themselves in the foot, the hockey gods are going to smite them in it anyway. As the puck hits one of the stanchions, the little connectors between the panes of glass, bounces out to a Jets player who gets the pass out quickly to Dylan DeMello, who then fires it on net through a heavy screen. Decord never even sees the shot come until it's in the net into the top corner behind him. And the Jets, with 27 seconds left, take the 2-1 lead. Which, of course, and I think pretty understandably, the Kraken aren't able to equal that in the remaining 27 seconds. They do at least get possession for 5 or 10 of those 27 seconds, long enough for Decord to get to the bench, but nothing comes of it. The Jets are able to clear it one more time, which is all they need to waste the rest of the time and get this win in regulation. So go figure, the Kraken play one of their better games of the season. Honestly, you could even make the argument we're the better team for the majority of the game. Maybe not by much. It was a pretty evenly played game, but the Kraken at least played pretty well and certainly were the better team in the first period. Either way, in the end, though, the Kraken with that 1-0 lead, and then it's a horrendous call to give the best power play in the NHL a chance. and then a terrible bounce that end up turning this game around, and the Jets get this one in regulation. The Kraken don't even come away with a point and a chance in overtime. So, I mean, I don't know that there's a more deflating way for a game to end or a more deflating game to have end this way than this one. After everything that the Kraken have put themselves through here over this last stretch of even a few weeks and how they've played games, all of the constant talk that we've heard from different players and coaches about this need to play 60 minutes, or Beniers after the game in Detroit saying that they just didn't show up to start that game, everything that's been going wrong, the things that they know that they're doing wrong, that they've been trying to figure out how to get corrected, to have all of that seemingly get corrected in this one. They get off to that good start. They play their best first period in who knows how long, and then follow it up with two pretty good periods. Yeah, there's some bits of the second that didn't necessarily go their way, but you're playing against the team with the best record in the NHL right now, so I think you can kind of forgive a spot here and there where they're going to take advantage of little holes in your defense. But for the most part, the Kraken played pretty much a full 60 minutes for the first time in a while. You'd have to like everything that they did. Heck, if they get to overtime and lose this one, while it would still probably sting a little bit, I think they'd feel decently good about it. But then for it to end on a bad bounce like this, and just a perfectly placed shot through a screen of 4 or 5 players that Decord never has a chance on, after yet another fantastic game. He ends this one, even with that going in, with a .944 save percentage. And unlike in Pittsburgh, where the official stars for games are decided by the local media of each team, and Pittsburgh has a reputation for being a little bit biased, so Decord doesn't even get a star in that one, in spite of having his first NHL point and also being very good in that one. He does get the first star in this one. That is aside from the point. We'll get to the real stars, which are the one that this channel puts forward here in a little bit. But yeah, to play this game so well, to, I would think, have to love how you'd played the game all the way through, and then one bad unlucky bounce off of a little piece of plastic holding up the glass, and it turns the game right around like that in the final few seconds and doesn't even give you really a chance to answer back the other way. Even with how this game ends, still, like I said in the beginning, I think there are a lot of good things to take away from this game, a lot of positives coming out of this game, really from either side that you're potentially on, as far as what the future of this season looks like for the Kraken. If you're in that hopelessly optimistic category, you're trying to channel the mindset of the team, who it's still their job to do everything they can to try to still make the playoffs somehow. You really have no choice other than to come out of this game focusing on everything that went well, how you played defensively for the vast majority of it. Certainly the best defensive game the Kraken have played in quite some time. You were able to create some decent offensive chances here and there against one of the best defensive teams in the NHL and get some good shots off on maybe the best goaltender in the NHL. You certainly like the way that the Beniers-Kakko line is playing and continued to play in this game. They just continued to take step after step forward in the right direction and got rewarded for it in this game, by the way. Matty Beniers plays the most minutes he's ever played in an NHL game, at least a regular season game anyway, as he ends up playing over 22 minutes in this game, which was only third on the team in ice time to the defensive pairing of Dunn and Larson. And speaking of things to take away from this positively going through the rest of the season, that top pairing of Dunn and Larson had been going through a bit of a rough patch here over the last stretch of games, and they were certainly a chunk of the defensive issues the Kraken had, whether it was in a specific period of a game or throughout an entire game over this last road trip and even homestand coming out of the break. They really had not been particularly good, and they looked a lot more like the Dunn and Larson that we're used to seeing in this game. So that's a positive sign as well. And then as far as, the rest of us from the outside that are maybe thinking a little bit more realistically at this point, or pessimistically, whatever the case is, those of us that realize this season is probably not destined for the playoffs, and at that point, any points that you pick up the rest of the way in the standings only hurt where you are in the draft order, and then, potentially hurt the future of the team in some minor way. The point is, there's a lot to like still about how this game went. I mean, obviously, you still got to watch the team play well, and it was an entertaining game, and they still didn't get any points to hurt their draft order. And you really like that the parts of the team that were playing well are big parts of the team's future, specifically in guys like Beniers and Kakko, as well as Dunn and Larson, who are going to be around for, Dunn a few more years, and Larson at least a couple more. And I mean, sure, maybe you'd like to see a little bit more offensive production, especially for a team where offensive production has been hard to come by this season. It is a Kraken team that, especially over this last month or so, really has not been able to get on the board nearly as much as you'd like to see. I mean, they've done it in bursts here and there. Again, some of the games that we mentioned, the one against the Bruins, the one against Utah, I mean, Buffalo a couple games ago. It happens for them, but it all happens at once. Then it all disappears for the next game or just disappears over the course of a few games. But I think this is one where you can kind of excuse that. It is against one of the best defensive teams in the NHL. And like I said, maybe the best goaltender in the NHL. So this was probably never destined to be a particularly high scoring game. Of course, we've said that before about even more defensively minded Kraken teams and similar defensively minded Jets teams, and still ended up with games that are like 6-5 or whatnot. It's the NHL. I mean, any given night, something that you don't expect can happen. But these are two teams that were not likely to play a particularly high-scoring game. And actually, I think we can use that to transition into the Kraken 3 stars, as always brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you want to help support a little bit more than you already are by watching to this point, you can help decide these Kraken 3 stars after every Kraken game by going to the link down below and supporting on Patreon as well. At the end of the season, if you support on Patreon, you also get to help decide the Kraken awards on the channel. So that's another fun thing that you'll be able to get out of it as the season comes to a close. It's still a few months away, but it's something that we're thinking about now with the destiny of the team seemingly more set in stone the more that they fail to get points in the standings. But anyway, getting to the 3 stars themselves, as for why on the Kraken end of things it was not likely to be a high-scoring game, and I mean defensively, why it wasn't likely to be high-scoring. With the first star, Joey Daccord, like I said, a .944 save percentage in this game. He was once again absolutely fantastic. The Kraken didn't make him work nearly as hard as far as putting together a single game highlight reel is concerned as they have in a couple of the games in the recent past, but Daccord was still very good for them, had a couple of pretty nice saves. He had one glove save on a deflected shot right in front of the net that, quite frankly, I don't know how a human has quick enough reactions to catch that puck, but he was able to snag it out of the air, keep that one out, and a couple other nice ones along the way. So he just continues to be another bright spot as far as the Kraken future is concerned. You have to really like where your goaltending situation is at least as far as the starter is concerned anyway, going into the next few years. Backup might be a discussion to have, but either way. Moving on to the second star, though, I think this one is pretty obvious as well. I would have probably given him the second star even without the goal, but Matty Beniers had an outstanding game. He was making a huge difference, obviously offensively, especially in that first period. He does get the goal, though his shot on that goal, while it still is a pretty nice shot to get it from between his feet and still lift it into the net, was probably the least impressive part of that play. Defensively, in particular in this game, he was outstanding, had a number of breakups in the defensive end to start things going the other way. A large part of the reason that line was so effective in getting down the ice into the offensive end in that first period was because of what Beniers was doing in the defensive end, and that continued all game long, even if it didn't always transition down the ice throughout the second and third period. And then with the third star, well, you could go any number of different ways here, but even in spite of the bad bounce that really wasn't under his control, I think I'm going to go with Adam Larsson as the third star for this one. He, like I said, that pairing has been a bit tough recently, but he had a really good game and had a couple of shifts where he really displayed how much of a lockdown defenseman he can be when he's on his game. There's a couple of shifts where he seemed like a one-man defense for the Kraken down in, around, and behind the net for them in their own end of the ice. But even in spite of the loss, I think there's plenty of other guys that would be worth mentioning here, and maybe you want to throw them into your 3 stars down in the comments section. Guys like, heck, Vince Dunn is the other part of that. I mentioned him a couple of times, that pairing having one of their best games here in quite a while. Capo Caco, Jaden Schwartz, a part of that Beniers line that got everything going for them offensively early in the game. Mahura had another pretty good game on the defensive end, as he has quietly been a pretty good defenseman here for the Kraken, especially as a third pairing defenseman. I mean, he is very much, don't get it wrong, the 6th out of 6 defensemen that the Kraken have. But even at that, I mean, especially at that, and for a third pairing defenseman, he's been pretty good for them. I'd say as a free agent signing, he has been more than worth what the Kraken got him for, and yeah, definitely not one of the guys on the team that is sapping up value for a cap team that is going to not come anywhere near the playoffs. And then there's Tolvanen had a pretty good game, laid a couple of pretty big hits that I'm sure were fun for people to watch, regardless of how everything else was going. And yeah, I don't know. Let me know down in the comments who you thought had good games, who your 3 stars would be, and how you felt coming out of this one. If you're just incredibly frustrated with the end of it because you're still hoping that somehow this team will find their way into the playoff picture, or if you find yourself maybe still frustrated at the end, but you understand that there's value in the way that this game ended in the long term. With that, though, until next time, back at home for another homestand against the LA Kings, I'm pretty sure is the first game for the Kraken coming up here on Saturday. Stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.